There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Acts. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. So last week, we left Paul at the Antonia Fortress barricade, bound to be scourged, to find out what caused the Jews to be so upset to riot. Where the first riot was by Paul being falsely accused by bringing a Gentile into the temple, where the second was caused by Paul just saying the word Gentile. And the thing that's disappointing here is that we don't hear of anyone coming from the Jerusalem church to help the Apostle Paul. And so this commander here, whose name is Claudius Lysias, whose real name is Lysias, but because he was appointed by Claudius, he took Claudius's name to honor him. But here, after the commander finds out that Paul's a Roman citizen, he needs to find out what the official charges are going to be to charge Paul, because that's Paul's right as a Roman citizen. And he needed to let the officials know the charges, where Lysias here is at the assumption that Paul has done something very treacherous, because why else would that whole crowd be chanting for Paul's death, yelling, "Away with this man. He's not fit to live." And having no charges and not knowing exactly what happened, because Lysias, he doesn't speak Aramaic, he sets up this special meeting with the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin, which would be the 70 most powerful men in Israel. And this would include the high priest Ananias, who would be proceeding over the council. And it's not like they all volunteered to come. They were commanded to appear. And so Paul, he's loosed from his bonds and he's brought before the council under guard with the commander who's watching and he's listening to see if Paul has violated any Roman law. But this isn't the normal place that the Sanhedrin meets. They usually meet in this place called the Chamber of Hewn Stones. But the reason they're meeting here is because the Romans, they couldn't meet with them there because Gentiles are not allowed in there. And so as Paul addresses them, he speaks to them as equals, where he calls them men and brethren. He doesn't call them fathers, that he's under them. And the reason is because Paul, he was one of them. He at one time was a voting member of the Sanhedrin before he became a Christian. And so here, Paul, he's probably very excited to speak to them because he's probably thinking that he's going to get a second chance to be able to win them from Christ, to be able to preach Jesus to these powerful men of Israel, because he didn't get a chance to finish his message to them because of the riot. Because you have to realize, Paul, he doesn't hate these men. He loves them. They're his brothers, where he's just like them. He's one of them. And Paul, he only gets one sentence out. "I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day," where that is all that he had spoken so far. And all he's claiming here is that he's innocent and that he's a good Jew and he hasn't broken the law. And Ananias, the high priest, he gives some kind of nod or some kind of signal to whoever's close to Paul to punch him in the mouth, which is a violation of the Mosaic law. And they all know it's a violation of the law because it's written in Deuteronomy 25:1, which says that only a man who's found guilty can be beaten. Where Paul here, he hasn't been found guilty of anything. And here we hear the word conscience, which is one of Paul's favorite words, where he uses it like 21 times in all of his writings. And he uses it here, and he uses it again in chapter 24, besides being in his letters. But he's not saying by conscience that he's perfect. He's just saying that he's not aware of anything that he's done against God, that his conscience is clean. But Paul's claim here, it wasn't received very well, and it angered the high priest. And so Paul, he realizes he's not going to get a fair hearing before Ananias. And history, it paints Ananias as this very violent, very corrupt man, and a very greedy man, where Josephus, the historian, he tells us that he stole tithes from the common priests and that he would do anything to increase his authority, where it was said that he cared more for Rome's favor than Israel's welfare, that he was in the pocket of Rome. And in 66 AD, which is actually not very many years from this point, when the Jews actually revolted against Rome, Ananias had to flee for his life. And then these nationalist Jews, they find Ananias hiding inside of Herod's aqueduct outside the palace, and that's where they killed him. So now with Paul being punched in the face, he's outraged, and he immediately reacts and he blurts out, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." And then he says, "For you sit to judge me according to the law, and you command me to be struck contrary to the law." Because this is supposed to be an open hearing. This is where they're supposed to be able to get to the truth. And here, Paul, he's being struck by who is supposed to be religious men. These are the people who are supposed to be representing the God of the Bible, where this is total hypocrisy, and they're doing it all openly. But this is where all the facts are to be carefully extracted to find out facts of the case. And so with this being the conduct of the Sanhedrin, he probably can't believe that even these members would obey such a command. Where Paul, he's calling this man who had him struck a whitewashed wall, and what he's calling him a hypocrite. And what he's referring to is how they would whitewash the tombstones. They would whitewash them so they'd be easy to identify, so that nobody would walk on them or come into contact with them. Because any contact with any type of dead body would make a person ceremonially unclean. So these tombs, they would look all clean and white, and so they'd be pretty on the outside, but they're all filled with death. They're filled with corruption. They're all rotting on the inside. But nobody here is concerned that they violated the law. All they're concerned about is Paul and his reviling of the high priest, where they rebuke Paul. And Paul, after hearing that the man who ordered him struck was the high priest, he apologized right away. And it's not because the man was right, but that he realizes that he himself violated the law without knowing that he did. But we see when he finds out, he immediately admits his fault, and he actually recites the law that he broke. Exodus 22:28. You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Where some people, they look at this and they think Paul's being sarcastic here. But I don't really think so. I believe Paul, he really didn't know that Ananias was the high priest. And then part of the reason would be that this is in an informal setting. It's not the normal setting for the Sanhedrin. So the high priest, he may not have been wearing his official robes. And you have to realize it's been about 25 years since Paul has been in this kind of an environment. And high priests, they change every so often. And this Ananias, he is not the same man as the high priest Annas, the one we know of from Jesus' trial. And you got to remember, Paul, he had poor eyesight. So there's a lot of reasons that Paul, honestly, that he may not have known that Ananias was the high priest. But when he found out, although he doesn't respect the man, Paul, he immediately apologizes, respecting the office of the high priest, which is how we're supposed to be. We might not always agree with our leaders or respect their views or their decisions, but we are to respect their office, like we're supposed to respect law enforcement and teachers, or else we end up living in anarchy, and where we have mob justice, where the mob rules, where might makes right. All right, and so here in this next part, I really like this because to me, this shows me that Paul, he wasn't just intellectually smart, but that he could think on his feet, that he's street smart, where he sees the situation he's in. And so he's going to take the focus off himself and put it on something else. Rebecca's really good at this. All my kids are really good at this. Where now Paul, he cries out, he says, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and the resurrection of the dead. I am being judged. Where he uses this situation to divide his enemy by playing the Pharisees against the Sadducees. And there are some people who teach this passage, and they're much more gracious with Paul than I am, where they hold Paul at a higher standard, where they say he only has the best intentions here. And I would actually say that they're probably right to do so. But these guys, they don't see this as a trick in any way, where Paul, he's only bringing up the resurrection because he's only wanting to preach the resurrection to these men. And so to them, he'd be preaching the same thing that he's been preaching in all the synagogues about Jesus and the resurrection, where they think that Paul wouldn't have that kind of lack of integrity to play such a cheap trick. But I don't totally agree with them, because it does say here that Paul, that he surveyed the room and that he knows that this group is divided over the resurrection and that he belongs to the group that believes in a resurrection, which is the Pharisees. And I believe that Paul here, he's looking for allies. And the resurrection was what these guys always fought about. They would never agree. Where the Sadducees, they only believe in the first 5 books of Moses. They don't believe in any of the prophets or any of the books of the prophets that they're scripture. They only believe in the things that they can see. So they don't believe in spirits, they don't believe in angels or miracles, and they don't believe in the resurrection. Where the Pharisees, they believe all those things. So Paul, he identifies himself as a Pharisee, as being one of these men, and he says the whole reason he's here is because he's a Pharisee and he believes in a resurrection. Where I believe he's trying to take that focus off himself. Because if you remember, what started the riot wasn't Paul mentioning the resurrection. It was Paul mentioning going to the Gentiles. And so now Paul, he causes another riot, and it happens right in front of the commander, Lysias again, where now the Sanhedrin, they're going to tear Paul apart. And then you can hear the Pharisees that they're mocking the Sadducees here, where they're now identifying themselves with Paul, and they're saying things, well, maybe an angel told him, because Sadducees, they don't believe in angels either. And I personally would never blame Paul for using this kind of tactic. I just think it's smart, because they struck him, and he was never going to get a fair hearing in front of these men. And so now what happens here is that the commander, he's not going to let his prisoner, Paul, who's a Roman citizen, be pulled apart by this group of men having this internal fight.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.